It's the first clue as to which way Gus may have wandered in his little boots and minion t-shirt after being seen playing in the sand at the homestead near Yunta on Saturday night.
The family of a little boy missing in the state's arid outback has been told to prepare for the worst. The 5-day search for Gus Lamont has so far failed to find the 4-year-old, despite the discovery of a crucial clue.
Services and the many organisations, community members and friends who have come together to help look for Gus.
It's been over a month since Gus Lamont was reported missing from his grandparents' remote sheep station in the South Australian outback, but the case is still stuck in limbo. No new leads, no sightings, no closure. And through it all, the Lamont family has stayed completely silent, something we've never really seen in similar missing child cases, where loved ones usually plead for help on camera. But finally, they've broken that wall with a statement read by a friend. And from there, one seemingly minor detail gets pulled apart: the footprint of Gus. Because when you line it up with what the family said, it looks like Gus couldn't have been more than 6 kilometers from the house when whatever happened went down. So, was Gus ever really playing in that sand pile at home? Or is there a much bigger secret the outback is hiding? The footprint as the key. We dig deeper into the clues surrounding Gus Lamont's disappearance. The current evidence paints a frustrating picture of dead ends and unanswered questions. Over 5 weeks have passed since that day on September 7, 2025, and investigators have turned up nothing new beyond the one footprint that's been mentioned from the start.
But a big step in the right direction to finding little Gus.
The boot was about 500 metres north of the property, and so that's sort of consistent with which direction we anticipated that he would have walked.
There's no fresh trace of Gus, no sign that he's out there surviving somehow, and no discovery of his remains to bring any closure. The police have stuck to their line that this looks like a straightforward case of a child wandering off in the harsh outback. But with each passing day, the absence of more evidence chips away at that narrative, making us question if there's something off about how this all unfolded. The third search effort wrapped up on October 17, 2025, and it was a big operation. They drained that dam on the property, which measures 4.5 meters deep and held about 3.2 million liters of water. Divers had already checked it once before, but this time they went all in, pumping it out completely to inspect every inch of the bottom and the surrounding area. Despite all that, nothing came up, no clothings, no remains of Gus, just empty mud and silt that led nowhere. It's the kind of thorough step you'd expect in a case like this, but the zero results only amplify the mystery. Now, as of early November 2025, the police are gearing up for what could be a fourth search, based on 2 independent peer reviews conducted by outside experts. These reviews looked back at the previous efforts, analyzing data from drones, trackers, and ground teams, and while they didn't find any major flaws in how things were handled, they did spot some opportunities to tweak the approach, maybe revisiting certain zones with new tech, or expanding the grid, based on weather patterns from that day. Commissioner Grant Stevens has been clear in recent statements that the task force isn't letting this go, emphasizing that they're open to every angle, even as they maintain there's no indication of anything suspicious. Still, the ongoing lack of any concrete leads beyond that initial find keeps fueling speculation among those following the case. Because in true crime scenarios, when searches this extensive yield nothing, it often points to gaps in the story or overlooked details right at the source. Shifting focus to that footprint, it's the one piece of physical evidence that's been highlighted since the early days, and it's worth breaking it down because it stands alone in an otherwise barren landscape of clues. This small print was spotted in the red dust, positioned roughly 500 meters north of the Oak Park homestead where Gus was last reported seen. From the descriptions and reports, it's a clear impression, not faded or partial, which suggests it was made fairly recently relative to the Tyler discovery on September 30, 2025, just a few days after the disappearance. Investigators matched it to the type of boots Gus had on that afternoon, the kind a 4-year-old might wear for playing around a sheep station, sturdy, practical soles that leave a distinct pattern in the dirt. But here's where it gets intriguing. Around this footprint, there are these round, brown pellets scattered in the photo that's been circulated, and they look exactly like sheep droppings, the kind you'd find in areas where the animals graze or are herded. It's not just a random detail. It places the print in a spot tied to livestock activity, not some isolated path a kid might wander down alone. And crucially, there are no other footprints leading up to it or away from it, no trail of small steps suggesting Gus walked there on his own, no adult prints nearby that could indicate someone was with him. This isolation of the print raises red flags in any investigation, because footprints don't just appear in a vacuum. They usually come with context, like a series of steps showing direction or speed. In cases we've seen before, like other missing child investigations in rural areas, a lone print often prompts questions about how it got there. Was it planted? Or does it point to the child being carried or driven to that location? The police have held firm that it's genuine and linked to Gus. But without additional traces, it hangs there as this solitary marker, almost too perfect in its loneliness, making us wonder if it tells the full story or if it's a distraction from something else. Now, let's turn to the inconsistencies in the family's account of Gus playing on that sand pile in front of the house, because this is where the narrative starts to crack under scrutiny. The story goes that around 5:30 p.m., Gus was out there on a mound of sand near the homestead, just a typical kid activity, while his grandmother, Shannon Murray, was inside tending to his 1-year-old brother Ronnie. She steps out to call him in for dinner, but he's gone, no sign of him anywhere in the immediate area. It's a simple setup on the surface, the kind of everyday moment that turns tragic in these outback disappearances. But dig into the details, and problems emerge. For one, there's no report of any footprints or disturbances on that sand pile itself. No little boot marks where he'd been digging or climbing, no scuffs from play, nothing photographed or documented by the initial response teams to confirm he was even there that afternoon. In a proper crime scene walkthrough, you'd expect that mound to be cordoned off, sifted through, and imaged from every angle, especially since it's the alleged last known location. Yet, from what's been shared publicly, there's zero evidence tying Gus directly to it. No toys left behind, no partial prints, just this blank slate of fresh sand. And speaking of fresh, the pile is described as newly dumped, which could conveniently explain away any unrelated marks or impressions that might have been there from equipment or other family members. It's almost too tidy, isn't it? Then there's the delay in reporting. The family didn't call it in until about 8:30 p.m., a full 3 hours after Shannon supposedly noticed him missing. No clear explanation has surfaced for that gap. What were they doing in those hours? Searching on their own, perhaps, or dealing with something else that took priority? In true crime breakdowns, delays like this often signal a scramble to align stories or handle an unexpected situation, and here it sticks out, because a panicked family typically alerts authorities right away, especially in such a remote spot where time is critical for survival. Building on that, the evidence suggests Gus might not have been anywhere near the homestead when whatever happened went down, challenging the whole sand pile scenario head-on. That footprint, with its surrounding sheep droppings, puts him in a grazing area, not the front yard play spot. Those pellets aren't something you'd find scattered around a domestic sand mound. They're from livestock zones further out on the property. It implies Gus was in sheep tending territory, maybe where the family was working that day, rather than idling near the house. A 4-year-old boy like Gus, full of energy, would probably gravitate toward the action, the herding, the animals moving around, over sitting passively on a pile of dirt while his baby brother is being babysat indoors. Kids that age crave stimulation, and the outback routine of sheep work would be far more appealing than solitary play. So, if he was out there with family members handling the flock, that shifts the incident site entirely, potentially kilometers away from the homestead. The lack of a footprint trail supports this too. If there are no connecting steps from the sand pile to that 500-meter north spot, it points to him being transported there, maybe lifted into a vehicle and driven out for the day's chores. We've seen similar patterns in other rural cases, where the initial home story falls apart under forensic light, revealing the child was elsewhere when the event occurred. This relocation theory explains why exhaustive searches around the house turned up empty. They might have been looking in the wrong radius from the start, focusing on wander-off paths instead of vehicle routes or herding trails. It also ties back to the delayed report. Those 3 hours could have been used to move things around or rethink how to frame the disappearance, turning a potential accident in the field into a safer, lost from the yard. Tail. Finally, the possibility of deception to cover up what really happened looms large when we dissect these elements, because several parts of the account feel engineered rather than organic. Take the snakes on the porch story. It's been floated as an explanation for something, perhaps tied to Josie Murray's confrontation with a journalist who trespassed, where she reportedly mentioned snakes as a reason for her aggressive response, shotgun in hand. But analysts have called it out as not passing the smell test, suggesting it's a fabricated detail to deflect from a different issue, maybe justifying why the property was off limits, or explaining away some other anomaly that day. It's the kind of side narrative that pops up in cover-ups, distracting from the core facts. Similarly, the sand pile itself comes across as a convenient invention. Being fresh, it could mask any pre-existing marks not related to Gus, allowing the family to point to it as his last spot without hard proof. If there were vehicle tire tracks or adult footprints, they're from earlier activity. The new mound label wipes them clean in the storytelling. The 3-hour reporting delay fits this pattern too. It's ample time to coordinate a unified version of events, perhaps cleaning up a scene or relocating evidence to align with the wander-off hypothesis. And the absence of any verification on the sand pile, like photos or soil samples showing kid-sized disturbances, screams mismatch. If Gus had been playing there, the soft surface should have captured multiple prints, scuffs, or even hand impressions from building castles, or whatever. Instead, it's silent, which in investigative terms often means the story doesn't hold water against the physical reality. This layering of inconsistencies, isolated footprint in a sheep area, untouched sand pile, unexplained delay, and dubious side tales, builds a case for intentional misdirection, where the truth might involve an incident far from the house that someone didn't want scrutinized. In piecing this together, we have to consider how these elements interlock, each one propping up a facade that crumbles under close examination, much like in classic true crime, where the devil is in the overlooked details. Expanding on the current evidence landscape, it's clear the stagnation isn't just from the outback's vastness, but from these foundational cracks. With no additional footprints discovered despite multiple sweeps, including ground teams, drones, and even Aboriginal trackers like Ronald Boland, who joined early on, the single print remains an outlier. Boland himself has been cryptic, saying he's certain Gus will be found and hinting at a bigger story he'll share one day, but he won't touch the footprint's significance due to his police collaboration. This reluctance adds another layer, as if there's context around that print, perhaps its placement or condition, that isn't public yet. The reviews for the fourth search are emphasizing data reanalysis, which could mean cross-referencing weather logs from September 27, 2025, or satellite imagery to track movements. But until that happens, we're left with this void. No fibers, no dropped items, no scent trails that led anywhere meaningful, and certainly no sighting of Gus or his remains in the scorched earth that's been combed over. It's this barrenness that heightens suspicion toward the initial account, prompting us to probe deeper into why the sand pile story doesn't align. Delving further into the footprint specifics, the red dust it's embedded in is typical of the South Australian outback, dry and powdery, which preserves prints well but also erodes them quickly with wind. That it survived intact suggests it wasn't exposed long, aligning with a recent creation around the disappearance time. The boot match is based on size and tread pattern, confirmed by family-provided samples, but without DNA or other forensics tying it definitively to Gus, there's room for doubt. Could it be from another child, or even staged? The sheep droppings around it are key. They're fresh-looking in the image, clustered as if the area was active with animals, which isn't consistent with a random wander spot, but rather a deliberate herding zone. No accompanying prints mean no evidence of struggle, chase, or companionship. Isolating it further and making transportation the logical inference, perhaps Gus was in a utility vehicle, hopped out briefly, left the mark, and then something happened. This detail echoes cases where evidence is minimal because it's curated, leading investigators to circle back repeatedly. The sand pile narrative's flaws extend to its timing and logistics. At 5:30 p.m., with dinner calling, a quick play session seems plausible. But the lack of any residue, sand on clothes inside, tracked footprints near the door, hasn't been addressed. Shannon's role inside with Ronnie positions her as the last to see Gus. But without corroboration, it's hearsay. The fresh mound could have been dumped post-incident to obscure tire marks or blood. if an accident occurred nearby, turning it into a red herring. The delay to 8:30 p.m. might involve notifying other family members first, like Josie out with sheep, aligning stories before going official. Gus Lamont's family speak out. For how the Lamont family has handled the spotlight, or rather, avoided it, their first public statement stands out as a pivotal moment that's raised more questions than it's answered. After more than a month of complete radio silence following Gus's disappearance on September 27, 2025, the family finally broke that wall with a brief statement delivered not by any of them directly, but through a friend who read it aloud. This happened in late October, and it was kept low-key, no press conference, no family members facing the cameras, just a relayed message expressing their devastation over what happened that Saturday afternoon. They described themselves as heartbroken and shattered by the loss of their beloved Gus. But that's where it stopped. No additional details about the day, no pleas for the public to come forward with tips, no emotional appeals that could rally volunteers or jog someone's memory. In the world of missing child cases, this is unusual. Families typically go on TV, hold vigils, or post on social media to keep the story alive and draw in help from everywhere. Here, it felt like a minimal effort, almost obligatory, and since then, there's been nothing more from them. Police updates from early November 2025 confirm this ongoing lack of public cooperation, with Commissioner Grant Stevens noting in recent briefings that the task force is pressing on without fresh input from the family, relying instead on reanalyzing old data for the planned fourth search. It's as if that one statement was meant to check a box, but it didn't open any doors for investigators or the community. Looking closer at the inconsistencies in their attitudes and behaviors, Josie Murray emerges as a central figure whose approach seems at odds with the urgency of finding a missing 4-year-old. Described by locals and friends as fiercely private and in control, Josie has been involved in caring for Gus at the Oak Park Sheep Station, yet she outright refused outside help during the initial search efforts. Reports from the early days indicate she turned away offers from volunteers, and even expressed reluctance for broader involvement, which contrasts sharply with the desperation you'd expect from a grandmother whose grandson vanished under family watch. This controlling stance extends to the whole family, who hunkered down at the property right after the incident, effectively barricading themselves from outsiders. That meant limiting access not just to reporters trying to get the story, but potentially to investigators as well, resulting in no in-depth interviews or shared details about Gus's daily routines, his favorite spots on the property, or specifics from that afternoon that could guide search teams. For instance, when journalist Jonica Bray from the Daily Mail traveled to the area in early October, she found the family unresponsive, with no one willing to speak on the record, and the property essentially off-limits, forcing her to rely on neighbors and friends for insights. This bunker mentality has persisted, creating a void where key information should be flowing freely to aid the case. Shannon Murray, as Gus's paternal grandmother and the technical owner of Oak Park, plays into this pattern too, though her role that day was reportedly in the homestead looking after baby Ronnie, while Gus was outside. Despite being the one who allegedly discovered Gus missing around 5:30 p.m., the family hasn't provided further details to bolster the investigation. No timelines of her movements, no descriptions of what she saw or heard, nothing that could help verify or expand on the initial account. This withholding of information leads to unconfirmed elements in the story, like the exact sequence of events, before the police were called 3 hours later. In true crime circles, we've seen how such gaps can stall progress. And here it's compounded by the family's overall refusal to engage, leaving detectives to piece things together without first-hand input from those closest to the scene. Then there's Josh Lamont, Gus's father, whose behavior throws up one of the starkest contradictions. Friends paint him as fiery and outspoken, the type who wouldn't hesitate to voice his thoughts or rally support. Yet, after being notified of the disappearance, not by the family, but by police knocking on his door late that night, while he was asleep at his renovating cottage in Bull North 2 hours away, he essentially vanished from the public eye. He hasn't returned to the property since, leaving it abandoned with sheep wandering the driveway and kids' bikes rusting on the lawn, as described by neighbors in mid-October reports. Josh hasn't participated in any public searches, hasn't spoken to the media, and friends have expressed worry about his mental health, conducting quiet welfare checks but getting no response on his whereabouts. This withdrawal clashes with his personality, raising questions about why someone so vocal would go silent when his son needs every voice possible calling out for him. The fact that the family didn't even inform him themselves points to deeper issues, with locals talking about a widening rift filled with words that can't be taken back, further eroding any unified front. Jessica Lamont, Gus's mother, and little brother Ronnie add another layer to this puzzling dynamic, as they've been out of sight in the area since the disappearance, offering zero information to the press or public. Jessica is described as quiet but highly intelligent, a high achiever who skipped her final year of high school to start university early, yet her absence means no insights from her perspective, no details on Gus's habits, or any family context that could assist. This invisibility, combined with the rest of the family's stance, creates a collective wall that's hard to penetrate, especially when contrasted with how other families in similar situations flood the airwaves with pleas and photos to keep hope alive. The internal family fracture amplifies these inconsistencies, with the rift between Josh and the Murrays, Gus's maternal grandparents, running so deep that it affected even basic communication, like who told Josh about his son's vanishing. Police had to step in for that devastating delivery, which speaks volumes about the breakdown in trust and cooperation within the group. Locals have noted this tension, with friends telling reporters in October that emotions are high and irreparable damage has been done, potentially explaining why there's no joint effort or shared statements beyond that one relayed message. Moreover, the family hasn't greenlit local interviews or door-knocking campaigns, leading to complaints from the community that police haven't canvassed areas like Bull North or nearby properties for sightings of Gus or Josh in the lead-up. Residents reported in early October that no one's come around asking when they last saw the boy or his dad, despite Josh staying at his cottage for days before the incident. This lack of permission or encouragement from the family hampers evidence gathering, as potential witnesses go untapped, and it underscores a broader reluctance to widen the net. Josie's perceived dominance over the property, even though Shannon holds the title, fuels speculation that she's the one calling the shots on who talks and when. Analysts have suggested she might be discouraging other members from engaging with media or investigators, creating a mismatch between the apparent goal of finding Gus and the actual behavior of controlling the flow of information. This top-down approach has left the case feeling insulated, with outsiders piecing together fragments from secondary sources rather than direct family input. These obstructive actions have had ripple effects that seriously undermine the search efforts, painting a picture where the Lamonts appear uninterested in pushing for Gus's discovery. By refusing outside help and withholding details, they've slowed the investigation's momentum from the start, meaning initial searches didn't expand as quickly or broadly as they could have. Locals voiced frustration in October reports about the absence of interviews and canvassing, which might have uncovered crucial leads like unreported sightings or anomalies on the day. Without that community input, potential evidence slips away, and the task force is left circling the same ground. The silence and lack of public appeals on TV or social media have minimized public engagement, resulting in fewer tips from the wider audience. In contrast to other missing kids cases where family pleas generate hundreds of calls to hotlines, here the vacuum has kept the story from gaining the traction it needs, potentially missing out on that one vital piece of information from someone who saw something odd. Their hunkered-down posture at the property has restricted thorough checks of indoor areas or understructures, despite 3 outdoor searches yielding nothing. This limitation suggests possible hidden traces, as exhaustive exterior efforts haven't panned out, and without family buy-in, probing deeper becomes challenging. We've seen in past cases how family resistance can conceal key spots, and here it fuels doubts. The family rift and the disappearances of Josh and Jessica have starved the investigation of direct participant info, forcing police to rely on limited data. November 2025 updates show the 4th search still hinges on rehashing old analyses, rather than new family-provided leads, highlighting how this lack of cooperation drags things out. Overall, these behaviors create the impression that the family isn't keen on intensifying the hunt, possibly to shield an accident or family secret. This has sparked community suspicion of foul play, even as police rule it out, eroding trust and suggesting they might not truly want Gus found. Friends' concerns for Josh's well-being, coupled with the abandoned cottage, add to the narrative of avoidance, where welfare checks go unanswered and the property sits silent. Locals in Bull North told reporters in October that Josh's plans for the family home are shattered, with no point in returning without answers, but his absence means no advocacy from him. Jessica's intelligence could offer valuable insights, yet her withdrawal leaves holes. The Murray's control, refusing help, echoes through the case, as initial volunteer offers were rebuffed, per early accounts. This pattern of obstruction has left the task force navigating blind spots, with Commissioner Stevens reiterating in November that they're committed despite the hurdles. The relayed statement, devoid of calls for help, exemplifies this, a token gesture that doesn't mobilize, keeping the case in limbo. As we examine these actions, the contradictions pile up, from Josie's privacy clashing with need for exposure, to the family's isolation limiting probes. The rift's impact, with police bridging communication gaps, shows internal barriers as obstructive as external ones. Community frustration mounts, with no door knocks meaning missed timelines of sightings. This cumulative effect underscores a reluctance that, whether intentional or not, hampers finding Gus at every turn. Where is Gus Lamont? Diving into why we haven't located Gus yet, even his remains, the obstacles are immense in this remote South Australian outback setup. The terrain out there is brutal, vast stretches of harsh, rugged landscape about 43 kilometers south of Junta, with rocky ground, sparse vegetation, and extreme weather that can shift from scorching heat to sudden chills, making it easy for a small 4-year-old like Gus to get concealed under brush, in crevices, or carried off by elements if he wandered far. Search teams have faced dust storms, limited visibility, and endless expanses where tracks fade fast, and that's compounded for a kid who might not leave much of a trail to begin with. We've seen 3 major operations roll out, pulling in police, the Australian Defence Force with their specialized gear, state emergency service crews in their orange vests, helicopters buzzing overhead for aerial sweeps, drones mapping grids. Aboriginal trackers like Ronald Boland bringing traditional knowledge to spot subtle signs in the dirt, and hordes of volunteers combing the bush on foot. Despite all that manpower and tech, not a single trace of Gus, or his remains has turned up. No clothing scraps, no toys, nothing to pinpoint where he might have ended up. The SES has revealed the scale of their Orange Army mobilization, with hundreds deployed in rotations, methodically sectioning off zones and logging every inch covered. But the outback swallows evidence, and after weeks, hope dims without results. One focal point was that dam on the property, 4.5 meters deep, and holding over 3.2 million liters of water. Divers went in early on, probing the murky depths, and then in the third search wrapping up October 17, 2025, they drained it completely, pumping out every drop to expose the bottom for a full inspection. Teams sifted through the mud, checked for any snagged items or remains, but came up empty-handed, ruling out that spot as a hiding place or accident site. Locals have been vocal about their frustration, pointing out how the search radius didn't push far enough initially, sticking too close to the homestead instead of fanning out into surrounding properties or further bushland, where Gus could have roamed if he got turned around. There's been no widespread door knocking or canvassing in nearby spots like Bull North, where folks might have seen something odd, and that gap could mean missed witness accounts or overlooked leads from people who know the area better than outsiders. Police haven't dug deep into interviews about the last sightings of Gus or even his dad Josh, despite Josh being at his cottage 2 hours away in the days leading up, which leaves a hole in community-sourced data that might have filled in timelines or movements. Ronald Boland, that Port Augusta-based Aboriginal tracker and trapper, jumped in during the early phases, using his skills to read the land for disturbances or paths a child might take, and he's held firm in interviews that he's certain Gus will turn up, dropping cryptic lines about the boy deserving respect, on all the right roads, and hinting he'll share the full story one day. But he's clammed up on specifics, citing his tight work with police, which adds this layer of unspoken knowledge hanging over the efforts. The searches have hammered the outdoor areas hard, gridding off sections and revisiting with fresh eyes. But there's been less emphasis on indoor spots or under structures like sheds, or the homestead itself, where something could be tucked away or overlooked, if the focus stayed on the wilds outside. As of November 2025, 2 independent expert reviews have wrapped. spotting ways to tweak strategies without slamming past work, and that's paved the way for a fourth search gearing up, zeroing in on the isolated station with refined data analysis. But still, no fresh traces have surfaced to crack it open. Pivoting to the notion that Gus might not have gotten lost at all, the police's main theory of him wandering off starts to fray when you stack up the empty searches against the timeline. After 5 weeks and counting, with that much ground covered and no signs, it points away from a simple lost kid scenario towards something like an accident or even foul play getting covered up. Picture Gus out there, during sheep tending duties, maybe getting clipped by a vehicle. Teams should scrutinize those farm rigs inside and out for dents, fibers, or residue, or roughed up by a ram, those male sheep that can charge hard and cause real damage if you're not watching. Based on hands-on farm experiences where rams turn aggressive without warning. If an accident like that went down, someone might have panicked and hidden the evidence to dodge blame, especially if there were prior close calls or ignored safety warnings. And Josie could have been the one overseeing that work, putting her in the hot seat. Digging into call logs from September 27, 2025, could reveal who reached out to whom first and from where, tapping cell towers or Starlink data to spot any coordination that smells like a cleanup or story alignment. The blank slate from outdoor hunts amps up the call to pivot inside the buildings or probe under foundations, where remains could be stashed if this wasn't a random wander. Boland's words echo here too, with his talk of Gus deserving respect, all the right roads, and police doing their best, hinting at a deeper secret or cover that's not just a lost boy tale. Cops are keeping options open, even without labeling it suspicious, but Gus's total absence after such intensive sweeps makes the lost theory feel thinner, especially on terrain that's been scoured top to bottom. This setup calls to mind other Australian cases where kids vanish without a trace, like the disappearance of William Tyrrell back in 2014, a 3-year-old who went missing from his foster grandmother's yard in Kendall, New South Wales, in a rural spot not unlike the outback isolation here. William was born in June 2011 and was in foster care when it happened, with his biological parents kept anonymous due to court orders. On September 11, 2014, he traveled from Sydney with his foster family to visit the grandmother in Kendall. The next morning, around 10 a.m., he and his 5-year-old foster sister were playing hide and seek in the front yard, while the foster mother and grandmother watched from the porch. William, dressed in a Spider-Man suit, was imitating a tiger's roar and ran toward the side of the house around 10:25 a.m. That's the last confirmed sighting. His foster mother searched the yard and house but found nothing, calling emergency services at 10:57 a.m. Police arrived by 11:06 a.m. and kicked off an immediate hunt. The initial response pulled in hundreds: police, CS volunteers, rural fire service, locals, searching bushland using helicopters, motorcycles, and divers in nearby waterways and dams. Detection dogs picked up his scent in the backyard but not beyond, and after 5 days no leads. In 2018, a forensic bushland searched it weeks with riot squad help, but nothing. Then in November 2021, based on new evidence, they searched 3 areas around Kendall, treating it as a remains recovery, and named the foster mother and grandmother, who'd pass it as persons of interest, probing a possible balcony fall. By June 2023, police recommended charges against the foster mother for perverting justice and interfering with a corpse, alleging she hid an accidental death and disposed of remains. As of 2025, William's still missing, presumed dead, with over 1,000 interviews, 690 persons of interest, and a $1 million reward. Theories started with abduction, suspicious cars spotted nearby, links to pedophile rings, which shifted to family involvement, with the foster mother's alleged cover-up. The dense forest, lack of evidence, and delayed revelations kept it unsolved for over a decade, mirroring how tough terrain and potential concealment stalled progress. Going further back, the Beaumont children case from 1966 in Adelaide, South Australia, hits similar notes with 3 siblings vanishing in broad daylight and massive searches turning up zilch after nearly 60 years. 9-year-old Jane, 7-year-old Arna, and 4-year-old Grant lived in Somerton Park with parents Jim, a former serviceman turned taxi driver, and Nancy. On Australia Day, January 26, amid a heatwave, Jim dropped them at Glenelg Beach before a sales trip. The kids busied there alone, a common thing back then, leaving home at 8:45 a.m., with plans to return by noon. Witnesses saw them around 12:15 p.m. at Collie Reserve with a tall, mid-30s man, fair hair, thin face, tanned in swim trunks, playing casually. Jane bought food at a shop with a 1-note, way more than their allowance, suggesting the man gave it. They walked off with him, and a postman spotted them alone later, laughing on Jetty Road. They missed Busicon. Nancy worried. Jim searched upon return, and police were called by 5:30 p.m. Searches hit the beach, sandhills, ocean, buildings fast, draining a boat haven on a tip but finding nothing. By day 3, headlines screamed sex crime fears. Dutch psychic Gerard Crozet flew in November, pinpointing a warehouse near home. Folks raised funds to demolish it, but digs in 66 and 96 yielded zero. Hoax letters in 68 claimed a man held them, setting up a failed meeting. Fingerprints later nailed a teen prankster. Suspects piled up. Bevan Spencer Von Einem, convicted killer who allegedly bragged of beach experiments killing 2. Arthur Stanley Brown, charged in other murders, resembling sketches, but dying untried. Derek Percy, child killer too young. Alan Munro, offender with a 66 diary placing him nearby. Harry Phipps, factory owner accused of paying kids to dig a hole post-disappearance. Excavations in 2013-2018 and February 2025 at his site found animal bones but no kids' remains or links. Linked to 1973 Oval abductions of 2 girls, same suspect vibe. Nancy died 2019, Jim 2023, both accepting unresolved fate. A $1 million reward stands, case open. Why no find? Bodies possibly bush dumped of town or ocean sunk. Hoaxes derailing, suspects dying off, lost records from floods. Theories. Abduction, murder by the man, may be known. Cult, relocation, accidental cover-up. Like Gus, harsh Aussie land, 0 traces despite horde searching. Family secrets speculated, turning cold with time. The true story. As we peel back the layers on the accident hypothesis in this puzzling disappearance, it starts with the idea that Gus could injured during routine sheep herding work on the property, perhaps in an accident with a vehicle in a split-second mishap. In that scenario, investigators would need to scrutinize any farm vehicles thoroughly, checking both the interior and exterior for telltale signs like dents from impact, stray fibers from clothing, blood traces, or other collision evidence that might have been overlooked or cleaned up. Vehicles are staples in outback operations, used to move livestock or people across rough terrain, and a 4-year-old darting around could easily end up in harm's way if supervision lapsed even briefly. This ties directly into the role of transportation here. The isolated footprint in the red dust, surrounded by sheep droppings, suggests Gus didn't walk there on his own from the supposed sand pile near the house. Instead, he might have been driven to that spot, hopping out of a vehicle, or being carried, which explains the lack of accompanying tracks leading to or from it. If an accident happened out there, the vehicle becomes central, not just as the potential cause, but as a tool for whatever came next. Another angle on the accident theory points to an animal attack, specifically from a ram, the male sheep known for their aggression on farms like this. From accounts of rural life we've gathered, rams can turn dangerous fast, charging with enough force to cause serious injury, or worse to a small child, if they're not watched closely or kept separate. Gus might have been in the mix during herding, drawn to the excitement of the animals over sitting idle elsewhere. And a ram could have hurt if group included one in a territorial mood. We've heard how these incidents play out on sheep stations. A kid gets too close. The ram sees a threat, and it ends badly unless adults intervene right away. This fits with the notion that the real incident site wasn't the front yard sand mound but farther out in the grazing areas, where the action was happening. Gus likely preferred tagging along for the activity rather than playing passively while his baby brother was babysat inside. The footprint's location, amid livestock signs, backs this up, implying he was transported there via vehicle, perhaps in a utility herd or ATV common for rounding up sheep, setting the stage for an unintended clash. Shifting to the cover-up side, if such an accident did occur, someone might have hidden Gus's remains to dodge accountability, especially if they knew the risks but let him stay in a hazardous zone anyway. This could involve stashing the remains in a hard-to-spot place like indoors, under a structure, or even farther afield in the vast outback. Which would explain why massive outdoor searches turned up nothing despite all the resources poured in. The 3-hour delay before reporting him missing stands out here. That window after discovering he was gone could have been used to rearrange the scene, move the remains using a vehicle to a concealed spot, or scrub away evidence of what really happened. Vehicles play a key role in this too. If the accident involved one, like Gus being run over during herding, the same ride could then transport his remains discreetly, leveraging the remote terrain where tracks blend into the dirt and distances swallow secrets. Josh Lamont's setup adds intrigue. He was at his cottage a 2-hour drive away, about 200 kilometers, in the days before, so his vehicle or a family one might tie into moving Gus or covering tracks, though nothing concrete points there yet. Checking call logs from September 27, 2025, could reveal coordination around this, like who contacted whom first to align on a plan. with the property's cell tower or Starlink potentially logging positions that show vehicle movements or hurried discussions. The cover-up might also extend to reshaping the narrative itself, pivoting from an accident in the sheep fields to a story of him wandering off from the sand pile, steering searches away from the actual site and buying time. This redirection fits with how the footprint stands alone, no trail connecting it to the house, hinting at a drop-off by vehicle rather than a solo trek, and if remains were shuttled elsewhere post-incident, it keeps everything contained. We've seen how these things unfold in isolated settings. A quick decision to conceal turns a tragedy into something more calculated, using the land's isolation to one's advantage. The delayed alert aligns perfectly, giving space to use a vehicle for cleanup, perhaps hauling remains to an indoor hide or burying them shallowly under a barn, evading the helicopters and drones that scored the open areas later. On the motive front, avoiding blame looms large, particularly if similar close calls had happened before and the responsible party ignored warnings about keeping Gus safe. Josie Murray emerges as a possible key figure here, potentially overseeing the herding that day, and if she'd been told not to let him near risky spots, like around aggressive rams or moving vehicles, but proceeded anyway, the fear of negligence charges or worse could drive a cover-up. Manslaughter isn't off the table in accidents stemming from known dangers, so burying the truth might seem like the only out, especially in a tight-knit but fractured family dynamic. The rift between Josh and the Murrays adds fuel, deep-seated tensions, with that can't be unsaid, might push for secrecy to shield internal secrets or prevent escalating disputes over the property itself. If the accident exposed ongoing family issues, like custody strains or inheritance squabbles tied to the sheep station, hiding it preserves the status quo, avoiding legal fallout that could tear everything apart. That motive ties back to the vehicle element too. If the accident stemmed from a vehicular mishap, the drive to conceal ramps up, with Josie or another perhaps dreading accusations of reckless supervision around farm machinery. Warnings from family about not exposing Gus to those hazards would compound the guilt, making a cover-up feel essential to evade civil suits or criminal probes. The outback scale aids this, where a quick drive in a locate remains far enough to baffle searchers, explaining the persistent lack of outdoor evidence. Josh's distant location raises questions. His vehicle might not be directly involved, but the timing of his pre-incident stay suggests family transports could link in, perhaps used to shuttle Gus to the fields or, in a darker turn, aid in post-accident moves. Call records could illuminate this, showing if pings from the tower or satellite data place vehicles in motion during that critical 3-hour gap. Coordinating a hush-up, broadening the lens, the accident cover-up combo gains weight from how it meshes with the evidence vacuum, searches drain dams, calm terrain, yet yield zilch, pointing to deliberate concealment rather than nature's hide and seek. If Gus was indeed in the herding zone, transported by vehicle for the day's work, an injury from a ram or rollover fits seamlessly, with the motive rooted in self-preservation. No one wants to face the law for a preventable death, especially if prior incidents flagged the risks. Josie's role, as the one possibly in charge, heightens this. Her privacy and control, as described by locals, could extend to orchestrating a narrative shift, using the delay to reposition everything via vehicle. The family split amplifies it. Protecting against further rifts or asset battles over Oak Park might justify the silence and evasion, turning a mishap into a buried secret. Pushing further, the cover-up's mechanics likely leaned on the property's remoteness. Vehicle drives blend into daily routines, making it easy to move remains without notice. Motive layers in civil angles. 2 lawsuits from Josh over negligence could strip the Murrays of the station, so burying the incident safeguards assets amid the rift. The 3-hour window, prime for vehicular errands, fetch tools, dig shallow, or relocate to a dam before divers checked. Call checks could bust this, revealing panic dials plotting the shift from accident to lost kid tale. In sum, the hypothesis hinges on everyday perils turning fatal, covered to evade scrutiny, with vehicles bridging the gap. Transport, concealment, all driven by motives of self-shield and family preservation in a tense dynamic. The other sides. As we branch out into the wilder theories swirling around this case, the abduction angle has grabbed a lot of attention from online sleuths and even sparked some media buzz, suggesting Gus might have been snatched by a stranger or someone from the local community rather than just wandering off. This idea hinges on that lone footprint in the red dust, isolated with no trail leading to or from it, hinting he could have been carried or driven away in a vehicle, instead of trekking there on his own from the homestead. Folks point to how the print sits amid sheep droppings, a spot tied to herding areas, implying he was transported there, maybe hopped out of a truck briefly before being taken. It's the kind of detail that fuels speculation in true crime circles, where a missing kid in the outback could easily be bundled into a car and vanish down those endless roads, We've seen how these theories gain traction when searches come up empty, and here, after draining the dam and calming the terrain with no trace, some are convinced it's not a simple lost child scenario, but something more deliberate, perhaps linked to family disputes or random opportunism. Diving into the specifics of this abduction hypothesis, it often centers on Gus being taken by an unknown man in a vehicle, with one viral story claiming a sighting about 100 kilometers from Utah where he was supposedly led into a car. This narrative popped up on social media, complete with an image that looked like security footage showing a guy with a kid matching Gus's description, fueling ideas of a targeted kidnapping, maybe over some hidden family grudge, or just a crime of chance in that remote stretch. Proponents argue it explains the total lack of evidence on the property. If he was grabbed and driven off, searches focused on the station would miss him entirely. But authorities have pushed back hard, labeling the photo as AI-generated fakery, not real evidence, and stressing there's no sign of foul play or suspicious circumstances. The Australian Associated Press fact-checked it too, confirming it's bogus, and police have repeatedly said nothing points to abduction, no witnesses, no strange vehicles reported, no ransom demands. Still, the theory lingers because of how the footprint screams. Not alone. No kid walks 500 meters without leaving more marks, so a lift in a vehicle makes sense, and the re-emergence of sinister ideas after the dam turned up empty has kept it alive in forums and comment sections. What bolsters this abduction talk is the sheer absence of clues after those massive hunts, 3 rounds with drones, trackers, and volunteers scouring the harsh outback, yet no clothing, no toys, no remains of Gus to suggest he perished out there. That void opens the door to darker possibilities, like someone scooping him up and speeding away, especially with the footprints set up suggesting vehicular involvement. We've pored over how theories like this explode when official lines don't satisfy. And here, the sinister reemergence, after no dam finds, has people whispering about a third party, as some experts have noted. On the flip side, the evidence against it is solid. Cops insist there's zero indication of anything nefarious, no foul play flagged. And that viral image got debunked fast by fact-checkers and law enforcement as pure fabrication, likely cooked up by AI to stir drama. No eyewitnesses have come forward with sightings of odd cars or people around Oak Park that day. And without concrete leads like tire tracks from an unknown vehicle or calls reporting suspicious activity, it stays in the realm of speculation. Then there's the intriguing tie-in with Benjamin, this other missing person whose case cropped up around the same time, sparking theories of a connection that could point to a broader abduction plot. Benjamin vanished on September 26, 2025, just a day before Gus, and his green Hyundai hatchback was found abandoned in the bush near Wirramina, not far from the Yunta area, on the very day Gus disappeared. This timing has led some to speculate Benjamin might have been involved in snatching Gus, perhaps grabbing the boy, ditching his car to evade trackers, and fleeing with him. Alternatively, others float the idea that both were victims of the same perpetrator, maybe a serial abductor prowling the outback, turning 2 separate vanishings into one linked mystery. The abandoned car becomes the centerpiece, left in a spot that could serve as a staging point for a getaway, and the proximity, Wirramina being in the same remote region, fuels the what-if chatter in online discussions we've followed. Unpacking this Benjamin hypothesis more, it posits him as either the kidnapper who targeted Gus for unknown reasons, maybe a random act or tied to some local beef, or as a fellow victim in a larger scheme, like a trafficking ring or opportunistic crime wave hitting isolated spots. The story goes that Benjamin, reported missing the day prior, could have crossed paths with Gus during herding or near the property, using his Hyundai to whisk him away before abandoning it to switch rides or go on foot. Community speculation we've seen ramps this up, with the car's location near key roads suggesting a planned escape route. Police traced the vehicle back to Benjamin quickly, confirming it's his, but stopped short of linking the cases, treating them as separate. Still, the coincidence of dates and geography keeps it bubbling, especially when searches for Gus hit walls. Evidence leaning toward this link includes the Hyundai's abandonment on Gus's disappearance day, right in the outback corridor near Yunta, creating a temporal and spatial overlap that's hard to ignore. Benjamin going missing the previous day adds to the eerie sync, and South Australian police acknowledging the trace but not dismissing public tips shows it's on their radar, even if minimally. We've noted how such proximities in true crime often hint at connections, and here, the ditched car could be a breadcrumb if Benjamin played a role in transporting Gus away. However, the pushback is strong, no direct ties between the two. No evidence Benjamin was anywhere near Oak Park, and cops have stated flat out there's no indication of a link, viewing it as coincidence in a big, sparse area where people go missing independently. The theory relies heavily on guesswork from the public, lacking specifics like shared acquaintances or forensic matches from the car to Gus's case. Expanding on the abduction narrative, that viral image story unfolded in mid-October 2025, when a post hit social media claiming CCTV caught a man leading a boy like Gus into a sedan near a remote roadhouse 100 kilometers from Untouched fast, with users tagging it as proof of kidnapping, tying it to potential family rifts where someone outside the inner circle might have motive. But within days, fact-checkers from AP dissected it, showing AI hallmarks like unnatural lighting and proportions, and police issued debunking it as misinformation that hinders real work. We've tracked how these fakes pop in high-profile cases, derailing focus, yet the theory persists because the footprint's solitude screams, picked up. No kid leaves one print without others unless lifted into a vehicle mid-stride. Beyond abduction and Benjamin, other expanded theories crop up, like Gus being caught in family secrets or land disputes common in the outback, with cultural or local elements yet to surface. Drawing from Ronald Boland's cryptic hints about a bigger story he'll tell someday. This suggests something deeper than a lost kid, perhaps tied to property feuds or hidden histories among the Murrays and Lamonts, where Gus's vanishing masks underlying tensions. Boland's about respecting the boy, on all the right roads. Tease at undisclosed layers, maybe involving Aboriginal knowledge or community whispers not shared publicly. For others, land disputes echo outback histories where stations fight over water rights, perhaps pulling Gus into a sabotage gone wrong, but no records show Murray feuds. Boland's respect comment might nod to indigenous land ties, unexplored. Indoor theories searches skipped privates, so remains under could explain. Wildlife dingo attacks documented, but no howls reported. Data tower pings could map family moves, revealing anomalies. Supernatural, local legends of spirits but dismissed. Sinkholes area geology has them, but no fresh collapses noted. These expansions, while speculative, hide how gaps breed ideas, with evidence thin but opposition firm from official lines. We keep digging, as each theory pushes for more scrutiny. The current status. As we keep tabs on this ongoing investigation that's captured so much attention in the true crime community, the current status shows a task force of detectives still very much active, zeroing in on reanalyzing data from previous efforts to spot any overlooked patterns. Police Commissioner Grant Stevens dropped his latest update in early November 2025, reaffirming that the team isn't backing down from finding Gus Lamont, with a strong commitment to delivering some kind of resolution for the family amid the uncertainty. They've brought in 2 independent expert reviews to dissect their methods, identifying tweaks to make things more effective, without any outknocks on what's been done so far. South Australian police are treating this as an active missing persons case, keeping the primary theory as the boy getting lost but staying open to whatever else the evidence might point to, even if nothing suspicious has surfaced yet. It's that balance, sticking to the wander-off scenario while not closing doors, that defines their approach right now, with Stevens emphasizing persistence in his statements, underscoring how the absence of new leads hasn't dimmed their resolve. We see this in how they're methodically sifting through what they have, from timelines to any digital footprints, aiming to build a clearer picture without jumping to conclusions. The conclusions at this point boil down to Gus still being missing after more than 5 weeks, with no traces or remains turning up to shift the narrative. Officials aren't seeing any red flags for foul play or anything out of the ordinary, so the lost child angle holds as the main explanation, backed by the remote setting where kids can vanish quickly. Stevens has been clear in his briefings that while the probes haven't yielded breakthroughs, the lack of criticism in those peer reviews means they're on solid ground, just needing to refine for better odds. It's an open case, full stop, with the data gaps stirring up public guesses, but the formal stance remains a non-suspicious disappearance. Reports from sources like Wikipedia echo this, noting the ongoing nature without an escalations to criminal suspicions, keeping it classified as a standard missing persons inquiry. That said, the community's chatter fills in the blanks with theories, though the cops aren't biting on those, sticking to facts that don't point anywhere sinister yet. When it comes to suspects, there aren't any official ones on the table. Police have been adamant about no suspicious circumstances or foul play, so no fingers are pointed at family members or anyone else. The Lamont family, including Josie and Shannon Murray, pops up in online speculation due to their quiet demeanor and the reported tensions. But that's all it is, speculation, with no charges or even formal questioning highlighted in updates. Ronald Boland, the tracker who's been helping out, keeps some details close because of his ties to the investigation, but he's framed as a collaborator, not someone under scrutiny. It's a clean slate suspect-wise, with authorities ruling out foul play across the board, even as whispers in forums question the family's silence. No accusations have stuck, and the focus stays on piecing together the puzzle without labeling anyone. Looking ahead, the next steps could involve that fourth push at the isolated property, zeroing in on data-driven spots to chase closure, as Stevens outlined in his November comments. Predictions lean toward ramping up tech like ground-penetrating radar or specialized dogs to cover angles that might have been missed, alongside broader community outreach. Think canvassing locals for tips on last sightings of Josh or Gus, or unusual activity around the time. They'll likely dive into call logs from September 27, 2025, pulling records to verify who reached out when, with the cell tower or Starlink data potentially mapping out timelines that clarify movements. Vehicle checks could come into play too, examining family rides for any inconsistencies that tie into the day's events. If progress stalls, there's talk of it sliding into cold case territory, but with the task force's vow not to quit, echoing commitments from SES and ADF, it's unlikely to go dormant soon. Much like how the William Tyrrell case lingers with periodic revivals, we might see more public appeals to drum up tips, expanding interviews beyond the immediate circle to snag details on strange cars or behaviors. Stevens' emphasis on analysis suggests they'll refine based on those reviews, perhaps cross-referencing weather data or satellite pings for fresh leads. The trajectory points to methodical escalation, avoiding rash shifts while keeping all doors open. That openness means they're not locked into one theory, ready to pivot if something new emerges from the data crunch. Community speculation keeps pressure on, but the official path is steady, with no rush to classify it differently. If the fourth effort mirrors past ones without yields, the cold case label looms, yet the parallels to enduring Australian mysteries, like Tyrrell, show these can simmer for years with sporadic boosts. Call records stand out as a key next move, potentially revealing coordination gaps or anomalies that reshape the narrative. Vehicle scrutiny fits too, given the remote setup where rides are essential, checking for traces that align with timelines. Public tips could surge if they amp up media calls, drawing from locals who might recall overlooked details about Josh's whereabouts or Gus's routines. The task force's persistence, as Stevens reiterated, signals no fade out, with reviews guiding tweaks like enhanced digital forensics on Starlink logs. It's a waiting game, but one with structured steps ahead. We track these updates closely, noting how the absence of suspects keeps the focus broad, not narrowed to individuals. The family's dynamics fuel guesses, but without evidence, it stays hypothetical. Projections include forensic deep dives, perhaps supponing comms data to nail down the September 27 sequence, who called first, from where, tying into potential movements. If cold case status hits, resources might thin, but public interest could sustain pushes, similar to Tyrrell's inquest sparking revivals. Stevens' November briefing sets the tone: committed, data-led, aiming for answers without forcing fits. Community canvassing seems inevitable, filling gaps like last sightings that interviews might uncover. Tech upgrades, from radar to enhanced analytics, predict a modern twist on the probe, ensuring nothing's left unchecked. The current wrap-up maintains the non-suspicious tag, with no remains or leads altering that. Stevens' words highlight opportunity spotting in reviews, leading to refined tactics without overhaul. No suspects mean the net stays wide, avoiding tunnel vision. Future-wise, expect that property revisit, but with emphasis on untapped data like calls and vehicles, potentially cracking inconsistencies. If stalled, cold case transition looms, but with ADF and SES backing, it's primed for longevity. Tips from expanded outreach could be the game changer, soliciting details on anomalies that day. The path forward balances caution with action, data at the core. Official stance remains unshould open case, loss theory dominant, no foul indicators. Reviews affirm the groundwork, paving for enhancements. Suspect void keeps it exploratory. Family and speculation but not spotlight. Next, data dives into logs and rides predict revelations, with interviews broadening the scope. Cold case risk exists if dry, yet commitment echoes in updates. Public engagement might surge, yielding overlooked sightings. And that's where we wrap this deep dive for today. The video may be ending, but this case is far from closed, with so many questions still hanging in the air. We'll keep following every development in the Gus Lamont disappearance right here on the channel, in our upcoming episodes. In the meantime, let's all send our thoughts and prayers to Gus and his family, hoping for answers soon.